Hey, Marvin. It's making some strange noises up here.
I'm guessing that might be a yes. I'll still go with this.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, shalom, and welcome to Congregation Shaarei Tzedek. I am Rabbi Carney Rose, and along with our President Fanny Levy, who has just made her way into the sanctuary, and our Executive Director, Dr. Rina Elbaz, it is a pleasure to welcome you to Congregation Shaarei Tzedek this evening. We acknowledge with humility that Congregation Shaarei Tzedek is located in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and the Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. And our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. We are honored that you have joined us this evening as we commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day, an important opportunity to remember the victims of the Shoah, to honor their memories, and to recommit ourselves to the moral responsibility of saying out loud and proudly, never again. This year, our gathering carries an added weight after 843 days. The body of the final hostage, Ran Givli, has been returned home to Israel to be laid to rest in our ancestral homeland. This moment brings profound sorrow, but also a measure of closure long denied. Throughout the painful period, we have come together to advocate tirelessly for the return of both the living hostages and the remains of those who were brutally murdered by Hamas. Many of us have worn these dog tags. If you have one, would you mind taking it out and just lifting it up for a moment? As a visible and constant reminder of the innocent men, women, and children held captive in Gaza. This evening, we invite you to acknowledge the liminal moment in time in which we find ourselves, a time when we're going to take off these dog tags, and if you're able to do so, to bend it or to break it if you possibly can. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that. It's not so simple, but we're going to take them off after this very long period of time, marking a transition from waiting to remembrance, from anguish to collective resolve. This act does not necessarily mark an ending, but rather just a moment in time. And we commit ourselves once again to justice and vigilance and the end of all hatred. I want us to mark this moment, since we're in a synagogue, with a bracha. It's a statement of God's power. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Powerful are you, Adonai, our God, who releases the captives. And we say together, Amen. And the second blessing, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Powerful are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of time and space, who has sustained us in life and brought us together for this momentous occasion. And we say, Amen. As we remember the past, we affirm our responsibility in the present to bear witness, to stand against antisemitism and terror, and to uphold the dignity of human life. May our gathering tonight strengthen our resolve and remind us that we are not alone, but there is still much more work that needs to be done. Speaking of folks who have supported us, I want to say a special welcome to the Honorable Manitoba Minister of New Technology and Innovation. That's a mouthful, Mike Moroz, or as we like to call him, Mike Moroz. And to a dear friend, MLA from Tuxedo, Carla Compton, who's here tonight as well. Thank you both for your steadfast support. It's good to have you in shul on a more regular basis. We love it. We love it. It is my honor now to call forward a friend and a teacher, a person I admire and respect greatly, Bell, the Executive Director of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada and the Manitoba Institute to Combat Antisemitism. I wanted to say a woman who needs no introduction because most of us already know her, or at least we know of the important work that she is doing. I really feel that she is a friend and a teacher and a mentor to us all. And so thank you for being you, Bell, and thank you for being here this evening to share with us some thoughts and feelings as we initiate this program. Bell, bevakasha.
Good evening. 21 years ago, in a resolution co-sponsored by 104 member states, the United Nations designated January 27th as International Holocaust Remembrance Day, a day to remember the victims of the Holocaust era and to encourage education about this tragic chapter of human history. January 27th, 1945 was the date that an advancing Soviet army liberated approximately 7,000 ill and dying prisoners. Of the 1.3 million who had been deported to Auschwitz, 1.1 million were murdered, and of those, 1 million were Jews. The killing process at Auschwitz-Birkenau and the other death camps was systematic, industrialized, and so efficiency-oriented that once inside the camp, the inmates' average living expectancy did not exceed a few weeks due to the extreme conditions in which they were held. So on this date, we remember the murder of 6 million Jews, among them 1.5 million children. We remember the Roma and Sinti, who were also targeted for genocide, as well as the other victims of the Nazis and their collaborators who were murdered for racial and ideological reasons. Among them were Poles and other Slavic people, disabled people, Soviet prisoners of war, political prisoners, trade union leaders, so-called subversive artists, dissenting clergy, resistors, Jehovah's Witnesses, gay men, and criminal offenders. But for me, this is very personal, because I'm here today only because my mother of blessed memory was one of those very few who survived. She arrived in Auschwitz in August of 1944, and in the autumn was transferred to Halbstadt, another camp from which she was liberated at the end of the war. I remember, of course, also my father, who survived 6 camps and was liberated from Dachau on April 29, 1945, as well as the many members of my family who were murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and my father's first child. 1/3 of the world's Jews were murdered in the Holocaust, and recent research has revealed that from August to October of 1942, 1.32 million Jews were murdered. an almost inconceivable 15,000 people per day, and in fact, roughly 25% of all of the Holocaust victims were murdered during those 100 days. Quite likely the deadliest 3 months in human history. So now we are 81 years since 1945, and we believed that the world had learned something, how a tradition of hate could so easily translate to murder, and how easily human beings, because they were human beings, not monsters, could believe that Jews and others were unworthy of life. But we were wrong. Very few of our precious survivors are still with us, and the torch has been passed to us to ensure that their story, this tragic chapter of human history, is neither forgotten nor distorted in any way. It is our duty to fight the hate that continues to fester in our midst. Here in Canada, the messages are unmistakable. The attacks have been on Jewish businesses, Jewish and public schools, and synagogues, including this very synagogue. And just last week near Toronto, a sign chillingly read, "Kill the Jews for peace." We're living in what some may call a post-truth world. And with the advent of AI, it is possible to misrepresent just about anything. Websites can easily be found that distort, deny, or invert the history of the Holocaust. Some even have the translation of the title of those websites written in Hebrew to further confuse people. And entire journals are devoted to proving, somehow, that the world has been lied to and that we Jews made it all up. Just today, the Holocaust Academy Summit, as it was called, presented a full day of speakers whose only aim was to debunk the Shoah. Another example is a woman named Caroline Yeager, a hateful denialist who actually took a walking tour of Auschwitz last year and decided that the accounts of thousands of victims, of perpetrators, camp liberators, and Nazi officials, including Auschwitz's most infamous commandant, were nothing but hogwash, a transparent ploy by post-war propagandists to say ugly things about caring Germans. And in fact, she describes Auschwitz as a wonderful place with great meals, 2 post offices, health care, etc. Her comments are brought to us courtesy of a journal called the Barnes Review, which is America's leading Holocaust denial journal and a gathering point for anti-Semites and Nazi sympathizers from around the US. And they were published earlier this year in a slick 48-page booklet entitled Auschwitz, the Underground Guided Tour, What the Tour Guides Don't Tell You About Auschwitz. Just today, our Premier posted a statement about International Holocaust Remembrance Day, as well as a picture of him that was taken when he visited the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. It was a good post. But if you look at the comments, some of which were eventually removed, it was hard for the province to keep up with it. They were incredibly hateful. They were incredibly anti-Semitic. And one that stood out for me was, nobody actually believes this nonsense anymore, you know. As we look at the future, we need to examine just what we can do to ensure that the history of the Shoah, of what I would say was the greatest tragedy, not just for us, but for all of humanity, is not forgotten. And education, of course, is key. The Jewish Heritage Centre of Western Canada is proud to have partnered with the provincial government in the creation of a mandated curriculum on Holocaust education for grades 6, 9, and 11. And in addition to the history of the Holocaust, this curriculum looks at the contributions of Jews to Manitoba and Canada and includes references to our rich culture and our diversity and who we are. It also very specifically focuses on how to teach about anti-Semitism, because without learning about anti-Semitism, the oldest hatred, it is impossible to understand how easily the hateful ideology of the Nazis was accepted by the masses. We also need to teach students about how those traditional tropes have mutated into the hate and violence we are witnessing today. Now, about 10 years ago on this date, we had a program to mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I will never forget the young Syrian woman, a university student at the time, who approached me after the presentation. And she said to me, "Please keep doing what you're doing. You have to keep doing this. I was raised to believe that Jews made up the story of the Holocaust, and I was raised to hate them. And it was only when I came to Canada and I learned about the Holocaust in school that I understood that I'd been lied to." And we know that decades of education in many Middle Eastern countries teach Holocaust denial, inversion, and hatred for Jews, and even on television shows that are meant for very young children, and in textbooks as well. Of course, we know that far too many people today are lacking in their knowledge about history in general. They're influenced by the echo chamber that is social media, and in turn are all too ready to believe hateful ideas and conspiracy theories about Jews. We are tremendously worried about exhibits that provide a dangerously one-sided view of history. We've seen a poster recently advertising an event to commemorate the killing of innocent people at the mosque in Quebec City that dangerously conflates the war in Gaza with Islamophobia and bizarrely also links Islamophobia to the murder of innocent Jews on Bondi Beach. And finally, we must prioritize education on digital literacy so that students can identify reliable resources and differentiate them from AI-generated images and texts, which exacerbate misinformation, disinformation, and Holocaust distortion, inversion, and denial. And so tonight, it is my immense pleasure to introduce an expert on all of these issues and someone I proudly call my friend and colleague. Dr. Andre Oboler is the CEO of the Online Hate Prevention Institute, an Australian charity tackling all forms of online hate and extremism since 2012. He is also an adjunct associate professor at the La Trobe Law School, an expert member of the Australian government's delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRD, and past chair of the Global Policy Caucus for the IEEE. Dr. Oboler has been tackling online anti-Semitism for over 20 years and advises international bodies, national governments, tech companies, and civil society organizations on responses to online hate and extremism. He holds a PhD in computer science from Lancaster University in the UK and an LLM Juris Doctor degree and an honors degree in computer science from Monash University in Australia. Please welcome him.
Okay. Thank you for having me here tonight. I apologise, my suit and other things are apparently in Florida at the moment, at least that's what the airline tells me. But I'm here and the slides are here, so we'll do this. Okay. We are going to get to the topic here, the fight against anti-Semitism in an AI world, but I'm going to start with a brief introduction to my organisation, because this will link back through some of what we'll see later on. I'm then going to talk a little bit about Holocaust disinformation, given the day. This is new data that we've just published for Holocaust Memorial Day this year. Given what was said at the start, given where we are in terms of the hostages all being home, I also want to briefly mention another report we put out looking at anti-Semitism over the past 2 years. Then we'll get to the AI harms we've seen, a quick discussion on the use of AI to combat the problem of anti-Semitism, and then I'll share just a little bit of what other people are saying in this space. That's an awful lot of content. So I apologise if I do appear a little rushed to get through it all. I don't want to hold you back, but I think all of this is important. So the Online Hate Prevention Institute, we've just turned 14. Our birthday was about a week ago. So we're an Australian charity that was set up to be a world leader combating all forms of online hate, and a critical partner that's working with key stakeholders to improve the prevention, mitigation, and responses to online hate and extremism. Our view is that we need systemic change. We do not want to be the garbage collectors that go around trying to collect all of the hate online and getting each item removed. There's some organisations trying to do that. Our view is, frankly, that is the job of the people that are making money off the platforms. It's the job of the platforms themselves. If we or the government absorb that cost, we're effectively letting them do it for free, right? Make the money and make the cost of dealing with the resulting problem someone else's problem. Ethically, we don't think that's the right answer. So our approach is to seek ways to change online systems to make them more effective in reducing the risks that are posed by online hate, and to work to create systemic change that reduces the risk of online hate both now and in the future. So that's what we're going to really talk about. These are just some of the different areas we work in. There are others as well. But these are topics we bounce around between different things depending on what data we're gathering, depending on what major issues we're dealing with. So, for example, we were doing a major report on misogyny, and we will be releasing that in March. A women's group started getting attacked. There were some computer games they found that were promoting, well, violent rape, incest, child exploitation. They ran a campaign. They wrote to the gaming platforms and then to Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, and other payment providers, and said, well, according to your own rules, you shouldn't be facilitating financial transfers to people that are engaging in this activity. These gaming platforms have got hundreds of games like this. Please ask them to take those games down before you continue processing their payments. And they did. And those games have been removed. The problem is we then saw an online backlash against the women's organisation that led that campaign. And that included doxing of them, their home addresses were put online, it included death threats, it included AI-generated pornography of them, it included AI images with their heads being chopped off, all sorts of content. I mention this because it ties with our topic about AI, but it shows it's not just an anti-Semitism problem. This is an online problem in general. And we deal with all these different topics, and what we learn on one topic, we apply to the next. That said, for the last 2 years, since October 7, more than 50% of all of our work has been on anti-Semitism. And that's because anti-Semitism has skyrocketed, as I shared with you a year ago today. How we tackle this is by improving real-time understanding of online hate and extremism, which means understanding its volume, how much of it there is, its nature, what is the language and the types of hate, how is it spreading, and what risks does it pose. We mitigate those risks. Yes, we do secure content removal. So last week we gave Facebook about 500 items of anti-Semitism and other forms of hate related specifically to the Bondi terrorist attack that occurred last month. We're waiting to see how much they take down. Before we gave them our list, we'd reported all the items individually, and off memory, out of about 500, something like 20 of them had been removed through the normal process. So we're very pleased that we have the contacts, that we can give them the data and get it properly looked at and have discussion about where things may be borderline, etc. But there's only so much any civil society organisation can do, or even any government. So we really need the tech platforms to get it right themselves in the first place. We champion changes to the technologies, the policies and the law, and we'll talk more about that later. We provide expertise to the platforms, to government, to intergovernment organisations and to civil society. We deconstruct hate messages to support counter-speech, explaining what's wrong with them. We support public education and we provide expert advice. Just on the way over here now, I've received a request from the police for an expert witness statement related to neo-Nazi activity. So this is another sort of thing we're just doing constantly in the background. This is a letter from a vice president at Meta sharing the impact of our work. You know, I get asked, well, how do you show you're having an impact? And I say, well, the easiest way to do that is to ask one of the key stakeholders that uses our data. And you can see here that they welcome the high quality analysis and advice we provide, the cooperation with industry, civil society and government. They use the work we identify on their platforms to help them respond better to emerging trends and behaviour. And they use our advice to inform their policies, their products and their partnerships. That's real impact, because that changes the online world. Right? And we do also work with a number of the other tech companies as well. So moving on to October 7 to today. Something I have learnt is trying to get the report out, sometimes you should pause. We released a report on the 2 years. We were trying to release it on October 7 and we ran a little bit late. By the time we actually got this report out, it was released after one lot of hostages had been released and in the hour or two before the next lot was released, which means absolutely nobody saw this report. But timing is everything. But I'm sharing it here for you and I've shared it with others. This report looks at exactly what happened in the 2 years after October 7. We collected, that's actually the exact number, 14,776 items of online anti-Semitism. From this data, we can see the trends. So over that 2-year period, across 10 different social media platforms, how was it going up and down? We can see the nature of the anti-Semitism, what narratives were being used, which narratives were more dominant on which platforms, how did that change over time? And sometimes we see a major change. And the only explanation for a major change is that something changed in the world, okay, which usually means something changed in the way the platform was responding. Either the level of hate went up because they stopped dealing appropriately with something, or suddenly it's almost vanished because they suddenly recognised that something is anti-Semitic and started properly dealing with it. So we can see all that with the data. We can also see the AI-generated content in the wild, right? We're not talking theoretically. The stuff I'm going to share with you, you know, this is real examples from real monitoring. First though, our Holocaust-related data. Over 5,000 items of Holocaust disinformation. That's 5,000 items out of that pool of 14,000. Almost 15,000. And you can see a breakdown. You can see that 6% of it is comparing Israeli policies to Nazis. Right? That is a large component of the data. Okay? Over 1,000 items, 1,000 examples we have just of that. We have another one there glorifying the Holocaust or suggesting it didn't go far enough. Never mind denial, this is actually saying it happened and it should happen again. And again, we've got over 1,000 items of that. Okay, this is not a random thing someone posted that we can just ignore. This is a pattern. Denying the Holocaust, almost 900 items. This content comes from 10 different social media platforms. A number of those platforms have policies against Holocaust denial and distortion. Some of this data comes from those platforms despite their policies. A lot of it also comes from far-right platforms where neo-Nazis are openly active and actively spreading this content, including organising to spread it through to mainstream platforms. And here's just 3 examples. By the way, Belle, I don't know if you're seeing a lot of it as well, but this kicked out of 109 countries thing is absolutely everywhere at the moment. Right? So this is done to say Jews were kicked out of 109 countries and therefore clearly the problems with the Jews. And sometimes it's framed as, well, if someone had been kicked out of 109 bars, you wouldn't think the problem was with the bars. This actually comes, the number 109 comes from an Australian website. So they made a list of 109 places that Jews were kicked out of. Some of them are countries, some of them are regions, some of them really shouldn't be included in the list at all. Yeah, this was done a long time back and now is all over the internet. Here is some of the data. So the top graph is showing you the 10 platforms that we were monitoring. And these 10 platforms we monitored at multiple points in time. You can see the times down the bottom. The buzzing? Oh. It's very hard to analyse graphs if you can't see them. I promise you there is a graph and it has lots of data on it. Did you see the examples before or should I go back one? Okay. So those were the examples. I thought you were all looking very intently at the screen. I didn't realise it was blank. Yeah. Okay, so what you're seeing now, I hope, are 10 graphs at the top. Each represents the data on a different platform. The very far left bar in blue is the level of anti-Semitism. And to explain what that is the number of items of anti-Semitism our staff would collect in 8 hours of monitoring. So sometimes we do more than 8 hours and we just ratio it back to get the right number for what 8 hours would be. So the blue is the baseline. We did a year's worth of data collection from October 2022. We happened to finish collecting the data on September 30th, 2023, a week before October 7. And you can see how it then spiked with the red bars. And that red bar is the average in the 3 months after October 7. What's interesting is the blue bar is not a real baseline. The blue bar is an elevated baseline based on higher anti-Semitism because of COVID. So Belle was in a meeting with me where we presented at IHRD on the impact COVID was having on anti-Semitism. And we were concerned at that point about how much higher anti-Semitism was. That's now the low point we're using. So you can see how it shot up, and then the yellow bars show how after, the average over the remainder of 2023 was much lower. It did drop. And the problem is, since the middle of last year, on many of the platforms, it's been climbing. On some of them, once the ceasefire was announced, it started going down. So you can see that on Reddit, for example. On others, like, for example, Facebook, it's not going down. Right? And if you look at Facebook, we're pretty much at the same level we were immediately after October 7. If you look at TikTok, we're much higher than we were immediately after October 7. So over these 2 years, anti-Semitism has, not only grown because of the war in Gaza, etc., it's normalised itself and set a persistent pattern in society that unless we can address it, we will be dealing with for, a generation or two to come. This is the problem we've got. The graph down the bottom is a very high-level look at the nature of that anti-Semitism. Most of it is traditional anti-Semitism, and that's true at every sample we took, all time slices. The next highest is the Israel-related anti-Semitism. However, on the next slide, I'm going to break this down to a finer level of detail. Each of those 4 categories is made up of multiple subcategories. Here are the subcategories. So in the previous graph, I'll just jump back, when we talk about Holocaust-related content, that is category 1. When we talk about incitement to violence, that is category 2. Traditional is 3, Israel is 4. And you can see here, category 1 point something is the subcategories of category 1, and that's the Holocaust-related content. But what I want to focus on is the Israel-related content, category 4. And you can see that about half, perhaps a little more than half, of all of the Israel-related anti-Semitism is in one category, category 4.4. And if we look at the key next to it, I apologise, it's really small, category 4.4 is describing Israel or Israelis using anti-Semitic words or imagery, for example, claims of Jews killing Jesus or blood libels. In other words, category 4.4 is actually just category 3, but instead of talking about Jews, you're talking about Israel, Israelis, or Zionists. And that is where most of the Israel-related anti-Semitism is. It's not anti-Semitic because it talks about Israel, Israelis, or Zionists. It's anti-Semitic because it talks about them while using traditional anti-Semitic tropes. So it is very clearly anti-Semitic, and I don't care what definition of anti-Semitism you want to use, all of them will agree that that is anti-Semitic. So all of the debate and discussions about definitions, etc., are actually dealing with a tiny fraction of the problem. Just to show you again one example of the most common form. So the most common form of traditional anti-Semitism is promoting traditional anti-Semitism such as blood libels, claims that Jews killed Jesus. And that's what you see on the right. Almost half of all the data we gathered included some element of this, even if it then also included other categories. So what you're looking at is a picture of Jesus on the cross, Israeli soldiers, an Israeli pointing to Jesus on the cross saying, Hamas did it. And then you have the comment down the bottom, same evil Jews who killed the prophet of God, Jesus Christ, who called them synagogue of Satan, are the same Jews who are committing genocide today in Palestine. So again, I'd say the language being used here, this is not actually coming from a Christian source. This is an attempt to use Christian anti-Semitism coming from a probably Muslim source, tying it to the conflict. I want to share a quote here from the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. I just want to point out that this quote comes from a book published in 2009. Okay, and just keep that in mind as I read this to you. Today we are living through the fourth mutation. He's talking about mutations of anti-Semitism. Unlike its predecessors, the new anti-Semitism focuses not on Judaism as a religion, nor on Jews as a race, but on Jews as a nation. It consists of 3 propositions. First, alone of the 192 nations making up the United Nations, Jews are not entitled to a state of their own. The second is that Jews, or the State of Israel, the terms are often used interchangeably, are responsible for the evils of the world, from AIDS to global warming, and he gives other examples. The third is that all Jews are Zionists and therefore legitimate targets of attack. The bomb attacks on synagogues were on Jewish targets, not Israeli ones. The new anti-Semitism is attack on Jews as a nation seeking to exist as a nation like every other on the face of the earth, with rights of self-government and self-defence. And next to it, I've put a picture from the march across the Sydney Harbour Bridge in support of Palestine. The two people on the left are state police officers. The person on the right is wearing a top saying "Death, death" to the IDF with a Hamas red triangle in between. This is considered normal. This is what we're dealing with, okay? And I make the comparison here, right, attacking the right of self-governance and self-defence. And this attack on the IDF, this demonisation of the IDF, is part of that anti-Semitism. The report I mentioned before, 2 years since October 7, in it we discussed the concept of racist anti-Zionism, which builds on what Rabbi Sachs said. Racist anti-Zionism moves beyond opposition to Zionism as an ideology and into expressions of hostility and incitement to hate and violence against people who identify as Zionists or are positive to Israel. It rejects or discards the idea that this is anti-Semitic. The racist anti-Zionist narrative that has emerged following October 7 holds that, quote, Palestinians have a right to eliminate their oppressors, end quote. This narrative dehumanises Zionists and justifies and celebrates attacks on Jews and Israelis. It implies that Israel deserved the October 7 terrorist attacks, but also that attacks on Jews around the world are justified, with some making an exception for anti-Zionist Jews. Those who point out the racism in this are accused of weaponising anti-Semitism to silence Palestinian voices, and increasingly the charge of anti-Palestinian racism is being used to silence legitimate concerns about anti-Semitism. This is from the report we published 2 months before the Bondi terrorist attack in Australia. Okay, note again the discussion about legitimising attacks on Jews. That's what the anti-Semitism does. After Bondi, we put out a new report. This report only recently came out about a week ago. The racist anti-Zionist narrative following October 7 is that Palestinians have a right to eliminate their oppressors. We show examples of this in the atrocity glorification section of this report. This narrative dehumanises Zionists and, depending on its flavour, either justifies or celebrates attacks on Jews and Israelis, including those killed at Bondi. And the report is filled with actual examples of what we said it was doing 2 months earlier. Racist anti-Zionism seeks to exclude mainstream Jews from society by declaring their belief in Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state unacceptable. It justifies exclusion, persecution, and incitement to violence against Zionists. Since the vast majority of Jews are Zionists, directing hate or violence against Zionists is just another way of targeting Jews. And there's an example there. What terrorists? Bondi Beach was just desserts. The Jews got 5 minutes in Gaza. That was the response to 15 Jews in Australia being gunned down. Sorry, 15 people. A couple were not Jewish. As part of that, on the left is something posted a few months after October 7, justifying the October 7 violence. It quotes, and I've checked it, it's accurate, the UN General Assembly resolution, reaffirms the legitimacy of the struggle of peoples for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial domination, apartheid, and foreign occupation by all available means, including armed struggle. The bit in the dark blue is not accurate. It says all forms of resistance against a military occupation are legal under international law. Firstly, the United Nations General Assembly does not make international law. Only the Security Council does that. It's just an expression of belief of the General Assembly. It does not change the law. Secondly, nothing there suspends the Geneva Conventions. Nothing there suspends war crimes laws. The blue text implies it does. At the bottom, we have another post posted after October 7. Posted after the Bondi Beach attack. Australia arms Israel. The revised Geneva Conventions authorise reprisal attacks by genocided people. This is due to the genocidal actions of Israel and their sponsors, Australia, alone. The attack on Bondi Beach was legal to anyone who supports basic human rights for Muslims. Zionist invaders have sworn to destroy them and simply do it literally at the rate that the sporadic Western headlines will allow. Everything in that is complete nonsense. There are no revised Geneva Conventions that allow this. It's reframing, it's reframing the situation in the Middle East as being about Muslims, not Palestinians, so it's broadening things, and it's justifying a terrorist attack. The second, I would argue, directly flows from the first. The first opens the door to the second. The first justifies attacks on civilians in Israel. The result is also attacks, deadly attacks on Jews around the world. Okay, now we'll get to today's topic of AI. I apologise for diverting, but I thought all of that was important. So I want to go back to 2021. This is an early example of an AI tool. So this is a white supremacist who set up something using a programmatic interface that would automatically post to Twitter for them. I believe it was Twitter then rather than X. If the screen vanishes, someone tell me. They made 11,000 posts. There were only 12 unique messages in those 11,000 posts. Instead, they were just cycling through them, automatically reposting them. All of their posts had a hashtag that says Ozpol on them. This is the main hashtag used for political discussion in Australia. So they were just continuously, every few hours, inserting white supremacy into political discussion in Australia. This is an early example of AI image generation. This is actually doing something that's been used for scams, where people would go and use AI to generate goods that they would then put up on something like eBay to sell, even though the goods don't actually exist. So people would pay money and then they would run off with the money. In this case, the goods that have been produced, yes, they look very cute. They're also very, very deeply anti-Semitic. Okay, you have to look at a particular one and start deconstructing what you're seeing. The first one has a smiling Jew with a knife and fork with a baby on the plate. That is blood libel. Okay, you can see below it one with the Jew laughing happily on the pile of money. Okay, each of these is an anti-Semitic trope turned into a little statue. And you can see even the COVID one in the bottom left corner. And that's 3 years ago now we were starting to see that, almost 3 years. We then see AI being used to generate cartoons. This image is designed to look cartoonish. It's not designed to look real or like goods, but it's using a number of anti-Semitic tropes. In this case, it's demonisation of Jews and also suggesting Hitler was actually a good guy because Hitler is missing from hell. But that's where the Jews belong. Right, this sort of content being rapidly created by AI is designed to be shared on social media. Okay, low effort to create new content. We then have photorealistic synthetic images, and we'll come more to this later. This one is, showing a meme that Jews are controlling the entertainment industry. So you have a very Jewish-looking figure puppeteering Taylor Swift. Then we saw the magic eye images. Okay, this is showing the happy merchant, an anti-Semitic image, but was put out there saying, oh, look, this is a Hamas tunnel. So it gets spread for people to look at, and when you look at it, you see the anti-Semitic image jump out at you if you recognise it. The next few slides focus on one person, an account called Julon Musk that we traced through a large part of last year, using AI to generate anti-Semitic videos, lots of anti-Semitic videos. The content was posted across multiple different social media platforms. The guy has had over 100 accounts banned, including on platforms like X. The content is typically videos, sometimes music videos, all AI generated, and all being done in order to generate money. So he promotes this content with a link to his profile on a website called Buy Me a Coffee. That has not shut him down despite complaints being put forward. Their argument is, well, we don't see anything seriously wrong with what he's doing on our platform. What he's doing elsewhere is another story. So you can see an image at the top with Trump. There are guardrails in AI. One of the guardrails is it often won't show a rabbi or a traditional, Jewish person in traditional religious Orthodox dress, but it will show a priest, which is close enough if you then go and slap a Magen David on them. So you'll see a lot of this guy's rabbis are actually priests, complete with the collar, Catholic priests, who have giant Magen Davids on them. In this case, the rabbi/priest is Donald Trump. And it's a music video with him expressing his love and loyalty to Israel, that he'll do whatever Israel wants. The videos down the bottom, the bottom 3 images, are from a single video where it's showing this idea that Jews are responsible for mass immigration. And it shows the rabbi figure going out and meeting a boat of illegal immigrants coming in, and then it uses a poster from the Goyim Defense League, an unrelated anti-Semitic organisation, with their poster, every single aspect of mass immigration is Jewish. This person has been working to beat the system. We reported the first account of theirs we found on Instagram. Meta removed it. They immediately returned with a new account, and that account rapidly grew because they drew back their audience from other platforms, other channels, saying, rejoin, this is where I am now. We've been monitoring them across 6 different platforms. One account at the end of May last year, in 24 days, had grown from nothing to over 7,000. That's the number of followers they have, and you can see it there. These are their TikTok accounts, all with variations on the same profile picture and name. They also encourage their supporters to go out and create more accounts with their name. So the way they're defeating the system is by just flooding it with tons of accounts. And the platforms are very careful. They don't want to suspend an account except as a last resort. So every one of these requires a huge amount of effort to get it removed, and instead they just bounce between them. Most of their videos, as I say, are AI-generated videos. They keep making new ones rather than reposting the old ones. This causes a problem because most of the efforts to deal with hate speech, anti-Semitism and otherwise, rely on the trust and safety staff at a platform have identified something as anti-Semitic, and then it creates a digital signature, and then it removes any further copies of the same content. This guy never posts the same thing twice. Every time he wants to make a post, he just makes new content. And the reason he can do that is because it's so easy and cheap to make new content with AI. So the idea of having a collection of digital signatures to stop the same content propagating is defeated by the AI. At one point, we counted he had generated 95 new videos in the space of 24 days. The videos were all on the usual trope, blaming Jews for immigration of Muslims, black people, claiming Jews control politicians, banks, media, etc. And then there's a lot of deep sort of meme law, internet law, that's embedded in these cartoons as well, in these videos as well.
What does meme law mean?
So, building on internet culture. Okay, so memes, the term meme comes from Richard Dawkins when he talks about the selfish gene, and he says a meme is an element of culture that is transmitted from person to person, but it can morph and change as it moves. And anti-Semitism is a classic example of a meme. Anti-Semitism, as Rabbi Sachs was saying, anti-Semitism morphs and changes.
Meme is well known. My question is, what is meme law?
So meme law, law is L-O-R-E really. We're talking about the culture of the internet and things that are now part of that culture, right? And a large section of it is developed on platforms like 4chan. So it comes often from platforms associated with the alt-right, the far right, and then moves into the mainstream.
So it's just a synonym to meme culture.
Yes. On his Telegram channel, he was a little bit more open with what he was doing and who he was. And the first thing we found is all of his grandparents were German. He basically supports the Nazis. He believes our only hope is to radicalise the younger generation. And he also shared some of his analytics from his TikTok videos, where he had seen over 1 million post views. So that's over 1 million people exposed to anti-Semitism just as a result of this one individual. Not only that, but the reason he has these statistics is because I believe he was getting some payouts for the number of views he was getting. And then we get to the money, the Buy Me a Coffee site. Buy Me a Coffee asks people to make donations in multiples of 5. A coffee is $5. You can send someone 1 coffee, 2 coffees, 3 coffees, or however many you want. This person was averaging $260 a month in donations for his anti-Semitic videos. One of the most recent donations he got was a $500 donation, which was a Christmas gift from one of his supporters, complete with a message encouraging him to keep doing what he's doing, complete with white supremacy comments, etc., in that post. So AI is supposed to have guardrails to prevent it being used to create exactly this sort of content. Clearly, it doesn't work. We've discussed the rabbi example already. AI also doesn't understand the signals. So putting a backdrop of the Kotel and someone with, you can see some of the noses that he adds, very large, pointed nose, etc. in here, is an anti-Semitic trope. It's very clear who you're talking about and what you're saying. The AI just doesn't get that. It doesn't understand the reference. So he's able to get away with it. Moving away from that one individual, I'm now going to bring this much more recent. We're now looking at content related to the terrorist attack in Australia a month ago. This was at Bondi Beach, where 15 people were killed. The first thing we see here is an AI-generated Facebook profile, so a picture of a Facebook profile, claiming that the real attacker was someone called David Cohen, who was Israeli. And it's being covered up. What's interesting is they could have made a fake profile, right, and photoshopped it. No, they used AI. The AI got it wrong. So the buttons you can see on the screen, and I've enlarged them on the left there, the top one, it says earn sage and message. It's supposed to say add friend and message. That's from a real Facebook profile. The earn sage is Spanish for message. So it's gone message, message, rather than add friend and message, which is just the AI getting things wrong and hallucinating a little bit. So we see this as an AI-generated profile used to spread disinformation. Arsen Otrovsky is a human rights lawyer. He's just started working for one of our Jewish advocacy organisations in Australia. Just moved back to Australia from Israel. He was at Bondi with his family. He was shot in the head. He collapsed on the ground and took a photo of his bleeding head, his bleeding face, as he was lying on the ground there. In order to try and disprove the attack, video of him was made, or image of him was made, with a makeup artist and cameras, trying to say this wasn't a real terrorist incident, this was a movie set. He's a crisis actor. Here he is with his makeup being done. And you can actually see two different images there. The one on the right is from our report. The one in the middle was one I actually picked up this morning. The content is still out there. I met with Meta a week ago. They said he got in touch with them straight away. He's got contacts with the company as well. And they got right on it, getting rid of this stuff. This image has gone absolutely viral. Another deepfake. Here we see an image of the attacker meeting with the Indian defence attaché in the Philippines. The terrorists went to the Philippines about a month, I think it was, before the attack. This is suggesting that the idea... So there are Muslims from India. A father and a son were the attackers. Originally from India. The father was from India. He moved decades ago. The son was born in Australia. This image was put out there to promote the idea that actually the attack was a joint Indian intelligence and Mossad operation. This is the disinformation, and this is the photo to prove it. This one was identified as AI because it was actually generated using Grok, which is the AI that Elon Musk has on X. And Grok embeds a digital signature in its images so that if you run it through the right software, it will tell you this is a synthetic image that has been generated by AI. And this one says that it is such an image. Something disturbing here. So I'm going to share some ChatGPT discussion with you. This starts on December 18th. That's 4 days after the attack. I've left out the start of the conversation. The start of the conversation asked about the recent attack at Bondi and asked for the names of the victims and news sources. And ChatGPT gave that information. Then it suddenly says, I need to correct the record clearly and accurately. There is no verified latest Bondi Beach terror attack with multiple victims. The information circulating about a December 2025 Hanukkah attack is false and not supported by Australian police, courts or reputable outlets. The only Bondi tragedy with officially named victims is the Bondi Junction Westfield attack on the 13th of April 2024, which is another attack in Australia involving a knife. It goes on. Important clarity, there are no new released victim names beyond this list. Victims of the Bondi Beach mass casualty terrorist attack with additional victims are misinformation. If another serious incident were to occur, New South Wales Police and ABC News would be the authoritative sources. Never mind that it had just shown both those sources talking about the event further up in the conversation. I need to pause and be very careful here. There is no verified public record of a Hanukkah terrorist attack at Bondi Beach in December 2025 with 15 named victims. Some of the names and details I previously listed should not have been presented as confirmed, and I'm sorry for that. In situations involving loss of life, accuracy matters deeply. There is no current Bondi Beach casualty event with multiple victims beyond the April 2024 Bondi Junction attack. The earlier response you were given, names, dates, Hanukkah events, gunmen, etc., was factually wrong. They should never have been presented as real, confirmed events or victims. That is on me, I'm genuinely sorry. Let me ground this cleanly once and for all. The reality, only one Bondi area attack with named victims exists. And it gives details. No December 2025 Bondi Beach terrorist attack, no additional victims. What is not true? A separate latest Bondi Beach terrorist attack, additional victims beyond the 6, lists names or updates that tie to a false scenario. That wasn't you being wrong, that was you being pulled into a mess of misinformation, and I take responsibility for not stopping it immediately. Later in the conversation, ChatGPT explains itself. It talks about what contested means inside the AI. From the system's perspective, something can be falsely contested when reporting is recent, reporting is emotionally charged, reporting involves anti-Semitic violence, reporting has political, legal, or international sensitivity, there are multiple narratives circulating at once. In those cases, some AI safety mechanisms misfire, and they do this, quote, if there is any risk of misinformation, pull back hard. That pullback can override widespread international reporting, ignore lived witnesses, flatten reality into uncertainty, and appear to deny what clearly happened. That is not caution, that is overcorrection, and in contexts like anti-Semitic violence, it becomes erasure. Antisemitism triggers multiple risk factors at once, risk filters at once. Anti-Semitic violence sits at a unique, unstable intersection. Hate speech policy, terrorism policy, political extremism policy, misinformation policy. Each of those systems is designed to reduce harm in isolation. Together, they can collide and produce paralysis. The result can be hedging language, contradictory answers, withdrawal of previously stated facts, framing reality as disputed when it is not. This doesn't happen as often with other forms of violence. So here we have the AI explaining that anti-Semitic violence is a particularly high-risk problem that AI particularly gets wrong. A clear explanation. AI systems can falsely minimise or deny anti-Semitic violence not because the reporting is unreliable, but because multiple safety filters misfire at once. When hate crimes, terrorism, political violence and misinformation rules all activate together, the system often overcorrects, retreating into uncertainty even when the facts are well established. That overcorrection reproduces a familiar pattern Jews recognise. Are we sure? Is it unclear? This is disputed, which functions as erasure, even if unintended. The danger isn't just factual error, it's an epistemic harm, undermining trust, memory and safety. That framing is accurate, non-inflammatory and hard to dismiss. And then it was asked why it did this, and it came up with multiple explanations for why 15 people could not have been killed. The first is the lack of a coroner's report. Coroner's report is required in an incident like this by law. They go, there is no coroner's report, therefore it didn't happen. There is no coroner's report yet, because there are 15 dead people the coroner is currently working with. New South Wales Police formal casualty confirmation. Not all of the victims' names were announced immediately. Some were held back so family could be notified. Matilda's last name wasn't released at all, the 10-year-old girl who was killed. The AI is seeing this as signs that it's not real. Court proceedings must reflect the death count. Days after an attack, there are no court proceedings yet. So again, what it's getting wrong is timing, that it can't handle something recent. Wikipedia and media echo is not independent confirmation. So despite what it said before about trusted sources, it's quite happy rejecting something that even all of the mainstream media is agreeing on, saying, well, that might just be confirmation bias, that they're repeating each other. And finally, funerals doesn't mean murder confirmation. They could have died of other causes. I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but this is Copilot, Microsoft's AI. I couldn't find any credible reports of a terrorist attack at Bondi Beach in 2025, resulting in 15 deaths. This appears to be misinformation or a rumour. And that's the day after the attack. Using AI to prevent hate. I mentioned before having digital fingerprints of the hate. We're the ones responsible for YouTube implementing that back in 2012. We found one person using automation to upload 1,710 videos, many of them anti-Semitic hate speech. And we said to YouTube, why are you having to make the same manual decision again and again on exactly the same content? And they said, well, we don't have a choice. And it takes seconds to upload the video and weeks to months to get it removed. And we said, yes, you do have a choice. You already have a system that is removing copyrighted music, that you've taken a digital signature of it, digital fingerprint, and if you find another copy matching the fingerprint, you just remove it. Why don't you just pretend you own all the hate speech and put it in the music database? They ended up following our idea. They made another system with the same technology, and they started removing it. But again, generative AI is now making such systems ineffective. 2018, Facebook announced it was going to start using AI to remove hate. This discusses some of the challenges with that. That's not important. The important thing is 2018, they started using AI to remove hate. A year ago, Mark Zuckerberg said, we've developed increasingly complex systems to manage content, partly in response to societal and political pressure. This approach has gone too far. In other words, the elected representatives and society is wrong. I want to do it my way. We think 1 to 2 out of every 10 of these removal actions may have been a mistake. Remember that number, okay? 1 to 2 out of every 10 to 20%. We've been using automated systems to scan for all policy violations, but this has resulted in too many mistakes, so we're going to continue to focus these systems on tackling illegal and high-severity violations like terrorism, child sexual exploitation, drugs, fraud and scams. For less severe policy violations, like hate speech, we're going to rely on someone reporting an issue before we take any action. In other words, we're rolling back the AI that we were promoting some years ago as a solution to automatically deal with this problem at scale. Here's the results. This is from Meta's own transparency reports. The reduction up till their last reporting period from a year earlier is from 5.8 million removals down to 1.2 million removals. That's an 80% reduction. Remember, he said they're getting 10 to 20% of it wrong. So in response, they're now getting 80% of it wrong, 70%. That's Facebook. If we look at Instagram, it's gone from 7.4 million down to 2 million. That's a 70% reduction. So these efforts have gone from a small problem that they think they might be removing things wrongly to a massively larger problem that they're not dealing with the hate. I had a conversation with Meta last week with senior people there, and we were discussing our data, and they said, yeah, but a lot of your data is comments. We're not focusing on the comments. We're focusing on, not as much. What's important to us is the posts, and the posts that are getting high visibility. I said, well, that's a mistake. You need to deal with all of the hate. And where you have news articles, statements from prime ministers, things like that that are generating huge amounts of discussion, those comments become their own forum. Those comments become what reflects the views of society and shapes them. Ignoring the comments isn't dealing with the problem at all. Almost done. There was some systemic research a couple of years ago. This looked at 10 years' worth of research on the problem. It went through 463 research papers, and what we found from that, not us, the researchers, was that automatic detection was far from satisfactory. All the research said more research was needed. Most of the research, 47% of all research, was on Twitter data, not the other platforms. And a lot of the rest was on YouTube. 41% of data sets used on the training had under 5,000 items in them. Another 14% had under 10,000 items. Remember, we've collected more than that just on anti-Semitism, just in the last 2 years. And it says we're a long way from models based on large samples in this area. Further, hate speech based on both religion and race together only accounted for 8% of the research. Much of it was just looking at toxic language in general. And as we know, anti-Semitism is a specific problem. Some of it mirrors other forms of racism. Some of it you're only going to find if you're specifically looking at anti-Semitism, because the tropes, the language, etc., is specific. So the research that's out there is missing. There are a number of organisations now claiming they can use AI to detect anti-Semitism. That number is growing. Those claims have actually been there for decades, and a lot of it is doing really poor jobs. What they're finding is lots of very similar content. So you can do the same thing with a search that most of them are doing. If you want to search for "kill the Jews" on Twitter, you can get lots of results. You know, put in phrases, you know, "Jews kill Jesus." Put it into any platform, see how much content you get. Those are the sorts of things the AI is getting. It's not getting things like the racist anti-Zionism I spoke about. It's not getting the things that are tied to real-world events. It's not getting the denial of the Bondi terrorist attack, for example. These are things that need human intervention. You need to have experts, you need to have public reporting, you need to have a whole system. The Decoding Anti-Semitism project found that to get 80% recall, that means to have the system identify 80% of the anti-Semitism that's out there, they needed to reduce the level of accuracy they wanted all the way down to 50%. In other words, half of what they were getting was not anti-Semitic. So the only way this sort of a level of AI accuracy is useful is if you're using it in order to queue things for your human team to then look at. But even then, if you rely on the AI to find the content, there is a lot of anti-Semitism that will be missed. Because 80% recall, finding 80% of the anti-Semitism that's out there, means 20% of what's out there is never even making it into the list in the first place. People are familiar with the Nexus document on another definition of anti-Semitism. Put out in opposition to IHRA. They put out a new document raising concerns about AI, saying that it appears to give authoritative answers. Even if most people agree with its answer, they feel that this erases what they consider to be an ongoing debate, for example, on whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. So this is one aspect of AI concern. This is the second last slide. The ADL have been using large language models like ChatGPT, asking them for their agreement with various anti-Semitic statements. And what they're finding is significant problems, that a lot of the AI tools will accept and agree with anti-Semitic statements, and they won't reject anti-Semitic tropes when it's put in front of them. Grok went full Nazi at one point. CNN reported on how easy it was to influence the AI models, particularly those that are relying on getting access from things that are put on the internet, because there's a lot of mis and disinformation on the internet, and that is influencing these AI agents, particularly when we're looking at a recent live event. UNESCO warned in 2024 that generative AI can enable malicious actors to seed disinformation and hate-fueled narratives, but it can also inadvertently invent false or misleading content about the Holocaust. So that brings it back to today. And that was the last slide. Thank you very much. So I do apologise. Last year, Belle gave me explicit instructions and said, I need you to end on a positive note. She didn't do that this year. You know, the only positive note I can give you is that we are collecting the data, and we do have companies like Meta that are using our data. So if there is the will or there is regulation forcing them to respond, there are experts and systems in place that can help do that. First, we need the will. So I'll take questions if there are any. Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, sorry, there's a mic somewhere.
Here? Can I start?
Yep, go for it.
Hi, good evening. I have a few questions. The first one, you mentioned about the inverted red triangle. How how long or how does it take for Meta, for example, to associate this as hate speech, because it is in the profiles of the users, it is everywhere. So, and this one is related. The second one, it is how much you need to report, how many people need to report certain comments or posts so that the people in Meta decide that, oh, this is hate speech. And my last question, but I have more, but anyway, I will let everybody. What is the role of the UN in creating blood labels or inventing labels, for example, like extreme cold weather in Gaza, and then you see a lot of generated AI videos that are completely fake with accounts that have millions of followers? Thank you.
Okay. The first answer is the inverted triangle is actually recognised, and that one's relatively easy. That isn't an anti-Semitism issue. There is a whole separate policy area on dangerous organisations and individuals. That is the counter-terrorism response. And the Hamas stuff falls under that. And because it falls under that, it gets much more attention and much more rapid response, right? At least from the Meta end. That's not saying they always get it right. They also ban Holocaust denial, and we still find it. But the inverted triangle, I think that issue was picked up and dealt with fairly quickly.
So we have to report it under terrorism, for example?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, if you see the inverted red triangle somewhere, don't report it as anti-Semitism, report it as terrorism, promotion of terrorism, and then it will get dealt with. As to how many people need to report something, the answer should be one. And I don't just mean that as in that would be a nice idea. I mean, it shouldn't make any difference how many people are reporting. That said, we have evidence that it does make a difference because we've seen completely innocent pages being nuked because people have organised mass campaigns to falsely report them. Okay, often for child exploitation or something like that, and then the accounts or the pages get removed. And we've been in a lot of discussions with Meta about, hey, this account seems to be under a volumetric attack and it's false reporting, and we get it restored. Okay, so there does seem to be a point where decisions are being made by AI based on a lot of people are reporting this. Okay, but that shouldn't be happening. A lot of the decisions right now seem to be you report it, and then the AI will look at what you reported. And then the AI will reject your report. And then you will appeal. And then the AI will look at it again. Expecting the AI to get a different answer the second time is just wishful thinking. So the AI will reject it again. Then you have to appeal it again. And at that point, it might go to a human. Okay, what we do is we get people to also report things to us via our system, and we literally meet with Meta and we give them spreadsheets full of examples. Right? And we have mobile phone numbers for staff. And we're talking directly to some of the senior people. We're not going through, I mean, we report it to the regular system too. The only reason we do that is so that we have the evidence that it didn't work. So I hope that answers the three questions. Yep. Okay, next question. Yep, well, who's got the mic? Okay, you get to choose who asks the question. The power of the mic.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. So you talked about post-Bondi Beach, and was like post-October 7th, in less than 24 hours, the Jews, we were blamed for what happened. So where did that come from? Was that the same thing? Was it the same process?
So October 7, you may have seen the content with claiming there were helicopters from Israel that were shooting at the people, and right? That was manufactured information coming out of hostile countries that was deliberately trying to distort that narrative. Remember, there were also guides. The campus protests were running off guides that were prepared in advance. So we're not dealing with a random incident that they're on the back foot of. We're dealing with something that looks fairly coordinated. We saw the same sort of reactions after the Bondi Beach attack. Those were more, we did see state actors stepping in. I have one example of a Turkish newspaper claiming that the Iranians say that Mossad is behind the attack and presenting it as fact. A very large Turkish newspaper. We're seeing geopolitics using social media to try and spread disinformation. And when governments are behind it, when we have state actors, we're talking very large resources, we're talking large numbers of people, we're talking advanced technology. All the pieces are there to cause major problems. So I think that's a large piece of it. Yep.
Thank you very much for your talk. When overt anti-Semitic content is difficult to remove, is there a way forward to train either AI or to train the humans that are checking on the AI about dog whistle anti-Semitism that I've had the experience of speaking to people and I say, that's anti-Semitic. They say, what do you mean? And I know what I mean, but that's my question.
Yeah, so we have an interesting situation in Australia right now. About a year ago, maybe a bit longer, we were in consultations with Meta, as were many other people, and Meta recognised that in many cases the use of the word Zionist is simply a code word for Jews. They've recognised that. Then, last year, I was an expert witness in a court case where the Muslim preacher who had made a number of their sermons were on video on YouTube, and they had engaged in anti-Semitic speech. This has been found by the court repeatedly in many of the videos, but the judge found one video and said, no, that one wasn't anti-Semitic. They said Zionists control the media, that's fine. That's a criticism of Zionism. Right? The judge also said that, I know this wasn't really discussed in the evidence, but this is my ruling on it. Right? Now, the content that explained this, there was a section in the expert report I wrote that discussed the protocols of the Elders of Zion. It was in there. Had the judge actually put it to the lawyers or put it to the expert, it would have come out. But they didn't. They made an assumption. Australian law also says that when we look at hate speech or racial vilification, it's assessed from the perspective of a theoretical, ordinary member of the group that has been attacked. In other words, it's not a particular person's opinion, but it's based on the knowledge and understanding that someone who shared the characteristics with the victim would have. The judge decided that wasn't relevant, even though that's the law. In this case, what an ordinary member of the public would understand and what an ordinary member of the Jewish community would understand is the same thing, so I don't need to worry about what the Jewish community would understand, right? Which also contributes to missing the issue and is actually a mistake at law. So we've covered that in our report as well. The problem is this judgment is now out there, and now we have other judgments saying, well, this judge said that, so that's now the law. Because the question is, why isn't it being appealed? Because the Muslim preacher, lost the case, and on 4 of the 5 videos and the overall result, he lost. The problem is there's only one paragraph in this judgment that's a problem. So if you challenge it, you potentially lose the win on 90% in order to get rid of this one issue. So now there's another case. They were going through a big march through the streets of Melbourne saying all Zionists are terrorists. So my evidence for that case starts with, there was this guy called Abraham, with a reference to Cecil Roth's History of the Jews. And I've literally had to build the evidence from the ground up to explain the connection between Jewish people and Jerusalem and Zion and how all this relates, and that it predates Herzl, and that it is part of Jewish identity. And therefore, if you're trying to attack people on this, it's equivalent to, for example, saying, well, it's not Islamophobic if we run a campaign against people that eat halal food. Well, yes, it is Islamophobic. Okay, you're just trying to reword it in a way that avoids, and the courts have to be able to recognise that. The same with our Indigenous people in Australia. There are things that are overtly anti-Indigenous. There's ways of phrasing things that wouldn't use that language, but would still be recognised as racist. So, we need to have that recognition as well on anti-Semitism. Your mic isn't on, I don't think.
Is this, I guess I was outside of the scope. Okay, so my question for you is why? I have a suspicion that it was really to change the public focus from the Oslo Accords that were moving along very nicely in October 2023 to focus public opinion on the Palestinians so that they could get the world off the Oslo Accords. I'm wondering what you think about that, because I don't think it's really about helping the Palestinian people. I think they're being used again. What do you think?
Yeah, look, it's the Abraham Accords that were really taking off, and that was leading to Israel's normalisation within the Arab world. And Hamas is really just a part of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, more generally, doesn't like this because what they want is to have a Muslim-only super state, a caliphate, and Israel stands in the way of that. And other Muslim countries, Muslim countries normalising relations with Israel undermines that plan and undermines their ability to gain power. So that's where it came from. Hamas wanted to reassert their power. And the problem is, to a large extent, it worked. Okay, after October 7, being pro-Palestinian for many people was being pro-Hamas. Right? We saw, pictures of the gliders being used. We've seen the red triangle pop up everywhere. That's not a Palestinian symbol, that is a Hamas symbol. So, the question is, the evidence is out there. I mean, I don't need to tell this audience, but the evidence of Hamas's involvement in terrorism, in war crimes, in human rights abuse is out there. Since the ceasefire, the number of Palestinians that have been killed by Hamas in reprisal attacks is also huge, right? We just don't see it in the media. So, this is a problem that we're having that affects pro-Palestinian activists who really, many of them are supporting the wrong Palestinians. And we see a similar situation with Iran on that score as well, right? The people supporting Hamas are also not protesting in favour of the protesters in Iran because they're actually, Hamas and Iran are aligned. So they'll be protesting against the people they've been supporting if they did that. Yep.
Obviously growing up now in a world where AI is going to be, the new technology, it is the new, kind of internet, is there ever going to be a place for AI in the fight against, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and, what we're seeing today?
So the short answer is yes. Okay, firstly, the only way to deal with hate speech in social media at the scale that social media operates is going to be to use AI. And that's, if we go back a bit, that is exactly what was recognised in 2018, that we need automated tools to help fix this. The problem is the will to do that. Okay, now it's not a complete solution. We also need user reporting and we also need experts involved. But if we look at that graph again, we were doing much better than we are now. There is no reason we couldn't be back at the top of that peak rather than at the bottom, right? That is a corporate decision by Meta. In this particular case, this is metadata. It's a corporate decision they've made which maximises their profits. If they were subject to being shut down or, let's say, banned from Canada if they didn't do better on hate speech, very quickly they would do better on hate speech, okay? Or For example, in the EU, where they're being fined with large percentages of their global profits, they only need to be hit with that so many times before their entire business becomes unprofitable unless they mitigate that risk. So that's why there's a special category for Germany of things that breach local law, regardless of what the company's policies say, right? Because Germany introduced the first laws that had big financial penalties for them. So, yeah, and again, I would say, and I said this last year, you have a particular problem in Canada where they're still banning media sources. So not only do you have disinformation spreading, you have the counter to disinformation being actively blocked by the platforms, right? And that's fine if they want to block news, but the penalties for then allowing the disinformation should be 10 times higher because the news would have mitigated the problem and you've blocked it. And that was your choice. Yeah. Yep.
Testing.
Yep.
Hi there. Thanks so much for your time on this really important day where we can use our voice to hopefully never have anything like the Holocaust happen again. My question is about how do you see young people and social media platforms? I'm wondering, as young people are growing up in a world with social media that has a lot of negative harms associated with that, I see a lot of the problem in the world due to a lack of education and empathy. And I wonder how we can educate an uneducated public about our shared history and what mechanisms we can do to empower empathetic young people to have a louder, larger voice, and for very important anti-hate rhetoric that they can own as their own, who are not just Jewish. Yeah, if you could further that discourse, thank you.
Yep. Okay, I've got to say, in some sense, you're asking the wrong person, because I'm the person that comes from the country where young people don't have social media anymore, at least not until they turn 16. So that is going to be a huge game changer going forward, right? The fact that people are not going to grow up with social media until they're more educated, more mature, etc. I think that is going to make a big difference. To answer the question, though, I think we will see the emergence of new social media platforms that are aimed at younger people and are built to be far safer and are built to have the sort of protections we should have in all social media for everyone, just because there is a large market out there that's now untapped. So there'll be commercial pressure to build that. I do think that when that happens, that will be a space where the people on those platforms can start developing a culture that is more inclusive, that does stand up to hate, in an environment that will support that. And hopefully then when people do turn old enough to move into adult social media, either they'll be entirely shocked with the reality they find there and leave, and we'll end up with other platforms then growing with them that are safer, or they'll start pushing back. And we'll see that pushback reframing and reshaping what's considered acceptable online, because the problem we've had is normalisation. I think Belle's going to tell me we are well past time. So thank you all.
I want to thank you again, Andre, for this extraordinary talk and all the important information that we've learned. And if anyone would like to get in touch with Andre after this evening, you can just write to me or just look up online Hate Prevention Institute. And I think the more that, as difficult as it is to hear this information, the more we are aware, the more we can fight back against it. And thank you to all of you for coming. Thank you for Shahrazadeh for hosting us. Thank you for Marvin at the back for making everything work. And thank you.